Everyone. It is that time of the week. Yes, my favorite time. I know, I always say it. What the heck? I'm not going to change. So I think you guys, if I didn't say it, I think you guys would think something was wrong. So, favorite time of the week. Welcome to Being Brown at Work Live. And I am sure if you have been with me any amount of time, you recognize this face of my guest. It's a recurring guest. But if you happen to be new, I'm going to introduce you just briefly to her. And we're going to have part two of what was a phenomenal conversation that we started before the holiday. So, this is Cheryl Thompson. She's the founder of CADIA, which is Center for Automotive Diversity, Inclusion, and Advancement. And I just want to say, you hear automotive, but Cheryl and her group work with anyone across all industries on this critical work that's around DEI. CADIA is a mission driven organization that supports diversity, equity, and inclusion for the automotive industry and other industries by providing professional development for individuals, along with resources, programs, tools that drive organizational evolution, which is, I think all of us would agree, is so critical. What we need truly is an evolution around the workplace, around corporate America. Welcome back, Cheryl, to Being Brown at Work Live.
Oh, thank you, my friend Linda. So happy to be here. Really happy that you had me back. That's good.
Oh my gosh, Cheryl, it's an honor. It's an honor and a privilege. Last time we had such an excellent conversation around, as you stated, the work that I do, because as those of you out in the audience know, the work that I do is focused around the individual, helping Black and Brown women really own their stuff because we can get in our own way, and then also implementing tools and methodologies so that irrespective of what be going on around us, that we can navigate that landscape successfully, right? And get to what you hear me say, seat at the table, however you define that next level opportunity in your career. So I do that individual work, or facilitate workshops with groups around the work you do within yourself. But what we're going to talk about tonight, and excuse me, in part one, Cheryl shared her story of the challenges she had in the automotive industry, and also conversation we had around that individual work, really being our own allies and that type of stuff. But today, what we're going to talk about is the systemic change. And Cheryl says something that I think is wonderful, and I don't want to misquote it. So I'm going to find it here in my wonderful notes. She says, what do organizations need to do through the DEI lens and retool for equity? Retool for equity. Fabulous. Because she
That's
also
right.
shared, right, Cheryl, isn't that right? Because Cheryl shared with us, and you might want to comment a little bit on this, Cheryl, that workplace systems were created in the 50s, right?
Yes, right, right.
Yeah,
By men, for men, because that's who was in the workforce. I'm not faulting them for that, but we need a
right.
refresh. we, we need to retool.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, no fault, because you're right. That is who was in the workplace. Women did not start to advance into the workplace until much later than the 50s. So Cheryl, why don't you kick us off? We're talking about systemic change. I mean, if there are some leaders in the DEI space or anyone in organizations, and they're right now, because we know it's been kind of an uneasy landscape since the unfortunate George Floyd incident, which has really kicked this resurgence off, right, on DEI. Why does it matter? What would you say systemic change is necessary? Why? Why does it matter?
Well, you shared your work is focused on the individual, and that's really where my work started. I felt like I got in my own way just being a female in my corporate career. And that's really where CADIA started was, helping the individual. But I quickly realized if we don't have leaders on board,
Mm,
really committed and being courageous and making that change that needs to happen, if we're not creating inclusive cultures so that when we do bring in women, people of color, other underrepresented groups, if the system isn't ready to receive them, they're not going
yes.
to stay, and we're wasting a whole bunch of money. And the systemic change, I think, is really, really important because if you don't put systems in place, if you're not changing your systems, you're relying on the kindness and the empathy of individual leaders, right? And
Yes.
and what happens when there's a crisis? Let's just say that I lost one of my top performers in a critical skill, and I have a friend who's going to be a shoe-in, right? What's going to happen? I'm going to put someone in that role that looks like me, I'm comfortable with.
Yeah.
So what we really need to do is, how do we make the systems inclusive and equitable by default, right?
Yes.
So let's just take an example of diverse candidate slates, right? A lot of people are piloting these or are looking at them or have implemented them. And that is, we want to have qualified candidates on that slate that have at least one woman and an underrepresented minority.
Okay.
So that would be an example of systemic change.
Mm-hmm.
But let's just say that I don't have time to fill that, to make that slate diverse, or I've looked, but I haven't looked too hard and I can't find anyone. If I'm not required to go get like VP approval to deviate,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to take that too serious. If I know that I'm required and I have to go get VP approval to deviate, I'm going to work a lot harder to find that
Yes.
qualified
Yes.
diverse candidate to at least, be considered for that opportunity.
Yes, because the point you made is that, there's individuals that are the
Mhm.
hiring managers, right? And if
Right.
those systems aren't in place, like the example you gave for VP approval or whatever approval to deviate, the natural instinct is going to jump in. That's what's going to happen. And the biases are going to show up. I mean,
Exactly.
let's just be real about that. And biases exist on both sides. I want everybody to understand we're not just pointing
Right.
them in one direction because they exist on both sides. But we do know this data has out there, enough studies have been done that the landscape is not necessarily tilted toward the underrepresented, the Black and brown people. It's not tilted in their favor. So to your point, which is why it's so important to have systemic change. Yes.
Right. And for Black and brown people, we need to have them at that table. You need to be at that table helping us think about what systems do need to be changed.
Mm.
What are the barriers and the
Oh,
obstacles?
yes,
There's that
yes.
saying, and I think it was originally created by the disability community: no decisions about us without us. Right. So
Ah,
we really need to pull in
yes.
the
I've
people
never
on the
heard that.
margin. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry. I had to react to that because I hadn't heard that. No decisions about us without us.
Right.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, that's so critical because I think to your point, how do you understand? I mean, you don't know what it's like to be me, right?
Right.
Unless you allow my voice to enter into the discussion process and
Mhm.
the decision making process. I think I might have shared this with you in previous conversations that we've had. I interviewed for a role and I had to interview 8 times, eight, eight for the same position. And I had to bring in the evidence of some of the stuff that was on my resume.
Oh, you're kidding.
I- And I know, Cheryl, and I didn't ask the question, but I knew that I knew. All the other candidates weren't doing that. One, they
Right.
weren't all coming in 8 times. They weren't bringing in evidence. So it's important if you're putting together your interview process and your vetting process or whatever you call it, to hear from people like myself who's had those experiences, right? Or statements made about my hair, or they see an organization and they make a decision. I know some people in the past, no one recently, thank goodness, that will look at someone's name and
Yes.
decide,
Yep. Yep.
you
That
know?
that is another systemic change, to take those identifying characteristics off the resume, the names off the resumes, right? You can do that,
Yes,
or you can use it as a tool, a teaching tool,
a
right?
teaching
Going through
tool.
the
Yes,
resumes, first pass, who gets thrown out, who stays, and then
yes.
just looking at it, how do we do? And use
How
that
do
as a
we
teaching tool.
Yes, no, exactly. Because you can't look at my resume today and tell, and clearly my name, Linda Talaferro, you would never even guess, right? And
Mhm.
my daughter's the same way. There's nothing on her resume. She's a third-year law student that gives you the impression she's a Black woman. So, that part of the
And you
system,
shouldn't have to do that.
true, we shouldn't. You're right. Good point. Good point. So,
Right.
so we understand, and there's also want to add this comment, and that I'd love for you to kind of take us into some areas that you think are critical that companies or those individuals leading this effort should focus in on as they're thinking about systemic change. But we all have seen the studies around the benefit of having a diverse group of people at the table at organizations, right? You hear it often, revenue increases. I bring my experiences, my way of thinking into the environment, and it adds those nuances and kind of shifts the direction, the strategic even approach in a different direction. There's value in having everyone represented, right? Value in
Right.
having that.
Everyone
Yes.
represented and everyone feeling comfortable to speak up and contribute, right? There's got to be
Yes,
that
that,
psychological safety at the table as well, so
oh
that we
my
see to
gosh,
speak up.
so
It
critical.
doesn't do enough
Psychological,
just to have a seat. We got
oh my
to have a
gosh.
voice.
Can we say that again? Not enough just to have the seat. You have to have the voice, and you
That's
have to
right.
have psychological safety around using your voice. Yes, the belonging piece, the inclusivity
Mhm.
has to exist, Cheryl. There's no doubt.
Right. Yeah.
So if we've got someone in the audience, Cheryl, listening, and they're saying, "Okay, yep, I get it, I get it, I get it. I'm not really sure where to start. We have all these systems. Where would you take them, or how would they
Yeah.
even go
Well,
about it?" Go ahead.
I will tell you, Linda, one of my favorite tools is called the GDEIB. Lots of letters, but it's the Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Benchmark. So it's this comprehensive tool that will, I think, do a really good job of telling you some things that you need to look at inside your company. So this tool was put together in 2006 by 106 global experts that have been doing diversity and inclusion, this equity we've started talking about in just the last couple of years. And
Yes.
it gets updated frequently. They just updated it 2021 in April to include more elements of equity. And it looks at 15 different areas within a company, and it's split up into 4 groups. And the first group is all about the foundation. So
Mm,
ensuring that you've got the business rationale for why are we doing this as a company, and that everybody agrees. There can't be any cracks in the foundation with the leadership team, right?
okay,
Wherever that
yes.
wink link is going to be a problem, because then everyone doesn't buy into it. Everyone doesn't believe. So really having that leadership team on board is number one. Having leadership accountability for the decisions and the processes and the retooling of the systemic change that has
Hmm.
to be in place. And then some type of governance for DE&I. So that's the first part. The second part is the internal. And I think this is the biggest opportunity for that systemic change, because it's looking at how do we recruit, looking at, are we going to the same schools because
Mm,
all of our recruiters or our hiring managers went to that school, and that's the good engineering school, or that's good, we get good finance or controllers out of that
mm,
school. But really
hmm.
looking at, how do we expand that talent pool, and make sure that we're looking at fishing in all the ponds.
Yes.
It's also looking at how are we assessing performance. We know that,
Okay.
let's just talk about gender for a minute. Women are more likely to be assessed on their personality, and men are more likely to be assessed on results and outcome. And I'm not a person of color, but I would imagine that there's probably a nuance in there for people of color as well,
Oh,
right?
yes. Yes, yes, yes. Yes,
And I
there
have
is.
seen some data that said people of color are more likely to be put on a performance improvement plan. Well, what's going on there, right? So
Hmm.
it includes looking at and maybe auditing performance reviews. And then also looking at how are we positioning people for advancement? Are they getting access to mentors? Are they getting access to sponsors? Are they getting stretch assignments? And really keeping a list of that. And do we have parity with the dominant group? Let's just say white men in
Yes.
automotive, because that is the dominant group. Do we have parity with women and people of color and other underrepresented groups for
Hmm.
who's getting those high profile, high visibility assignment exposure that are going to set you up for advancement, right? We know in automotive that operations, anything having a P&L
Yep.
responsibility, anything that's customer facing, that's going to set you up, right?
Yes.
So it's
Yes,
it's looking
absolutely.
at how people are recruited, how people are hired, back to the diverse slate of candidates, ensuring there's diversity on that interview team, ensuring that you've got education. You mentioned bias. We all, if you
Hmm.
have a brain, you have bias,
Yeah,
right? We
absolutely.
all have it.
Absolutely.
And
We
we
do.
need to just, we need to be educated on what is bias, and we need to be reminded. So I have this cheat sheet. You can't really,
Ah,
really see
yeah,
it.
yeah.
But,
I see
when
it.
I do training on unconscious bias, it's like, let's pull this out every time you're doing anything having to do with leaders, having that
Hmm.
ability to make a decision, because it comes up in, all of the phases of talent management. And just remember what the biases are that are most
Right.
common, that come up during talent development.
Yes.
So,
And
so that's
Cheryl,
a huge piece.
that's all the stuff you just mentioned is just phenomenal. And I agree with you. What are the letters again? GE? Oh,
GDEIB. So it's
GD.
just Global Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Benchmark.
Got it, Jen.
It's
GBDI.
free. It's free. Can you
Oh, and
believe
it's
it?
free.
It's
Wow.
yes. And
Wow.
if you want to use it to assess your company, all you have to do is ask for permission. So it's looking at that internal part, and then it looks at the bridging part, which is all about DEI communications, internal and external. It's learning and awareness, which I think is really one of those systemic things that need to happen, because
Yes.
often there's a lot of myths out there. There's a
Yes.
lot of misconceptions about what is diversity, equity, and inclusion. People have
Yes.
this thought in their mind that they're going to lose something, or that it's reverse discrimination. Like, let's just get everybody
Let's,
educated.
yes. Oh my gosh. I'm so glad you mentioned that because I was going to bring that up before we go because I think that's where a lot of the reluctance lies. I think that's where the lack of sustainability
Yes,
happens when people try to launch into this is because of those myths, right? I mean, I know some people that believe, DEI is just all about quotas. And it's unfortunate because some organizations are handling it that way. Hey, I need to see X percentage here. And they're even tracking percentages. I'm like, oh my God, can we just not go back to the 70s or 60s where there was quotas? If you change this part of what you're talking about, which is the DNA of an organization, the culture of the organization, everything else comes, right? You don't have
exactly.
it all comes, but it's that mentality that somebody's going to lose, and I remember sharing with someone, look, when you start tracking these numbers, or when you have a hiring manager or someone that has a team, and you say he happens to be a white male, and you say to him, your performance review, one of your goals is around you having X percentage women or you having X percentage Black women. You think he's not going to get a little ticked off? You think he's not going to get a little, I mean, that's natural. It's the, innate biases. Okay, somehow I am going to get penalized if I don't put a Black person in that seat. So let me just go pick someone arbitrarily. Then they bring them in and then they ignore them, mistreat them. Next thing you know, they're on a pit.
Yep. And
It's
then
just,
and then they're like, see, I told you.
yeah, exactly. Boom, exactly. Then they're like,
Yeah.
see, I told you, why do it? And
Mm.
so I think, to start with it, that conversation, what you just said is so critical. And we need to be able to have these courageous conversations. People need to be psychologically safe in the environment to do so, because it starts with that awareness, the real awareness, the truth, the education behind what is DE&I? Why is it important? What does it look like? Right? And start to kill some of these myths. I think it's so critical. That's where it starts from. Otherwise, I mean, we're going to be talking about this, you and I, what, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? I hope not,
Right. Right,
So,
right. Yeah, we like to say we need to normalize and operationalize DEI.
mm,
Right? So just
love
normalize it. It's
that.
not a scary thing, right? We've all probably
Yes.
experienced not belonging or not feeling included, even if white males, right? I just think of this one gentleman that I worked for. He was just amazing. He was like one of those people you go to calm down, right? Something would happen and I would be all stressed out. He would be the guy that calmed me down. And he was from Poland. And what he shared with me was he did not speak in meetings for his first 5 years in this country because he was self-conscious of his accent, right?
Accent.
So
Hmm.
everybody has something that has made them
Yes.
feel not included or like they didn't belong.
Yeah.
So let's just, acknowledge that as well. This stuff really applies to everyone. But when you're really intentional, when you look at the data and you see where you're at, and you look at not the symptoms, because I would say the symptom is, that number that people are starting to track, that end result. But let's look at the root cause, right? Are
Yes.
we
Yes.
losing women and people of color at a faster rate than our majority group, right? Are
Yes.
they
Yes.
getting the same opportunities to have mentorship, sponsorship, or those high visibility assignments? Are we making our benefits as inclusive as we can, right? Just think about
Mm,
parental leave
good
versus
point.
maternity leave, right?
Yes.
Or leave for taking care of an aging parent, because women are more likely to be the
Hmm.
caregivers, right? We've
Hmm.
definitely seen all of that through COVID, but it's really looking at the benefits. And again, I don't know how you do all of that without bringing underrepresented people to the
To the
table for that
table.
discussion.
Yes.
And you can do that by tapping into employee resource groups. It's the perfect place.
It's the best place, and people, they would be eager, I think, to
Yes.
participate in that, eager to share. But you've got to create the environment that people feel safe and that
Mhm.
they know
Yeah.
that their voice will be heard. I can't tell you the number of times, Cheryl, that either myself or clients have experienced sharing the voice, and there's some type of retribution that's associated with the fact that you did speak up, right? And so that's why we talked about psychological safety earlier. It's so critical. But I'm going to tell you what, I mean, I think in today's day and age, and my audience knows this, I am a glass half full person. I am positive, positive, positive. And although people would say, oh my gosh, you're a Black woman, you really, all the stuff that's happening. Yes, in spite of it all, I still hold on to the possibility, the fact, excuse me, the possibility, the hope, the belief that the landscape will shift. It already has started to, right? But we'll
Yes.
shift it in a more meaningful manner, and we will be able to sustain it long term, which is why the work you do at CADIA is so critically important. And if any of you are out there, I don't care what your industry is, you want to go to CADIA, search them online, go and see all the tools and resources that they have to offer. Cheryl, her and her team can come into your organization, help you assess your nuances. They even have training that you can send your people to. I mean, there's just so much that CADIA has to offer. That's why your work is so critical, Cheryl. And I've shared this with you in person, and I want to say it here, corporately on this live. I can't express how much, as a Black woman, I mean, I'm 35 years into my career now, appreciate the work that you do. Wish that someone like you existed back when I started you. And I kind of started at the same time. So, and we both had
Oh,
those same
thank you.
challenges, which is
Oh,
why you
yes.
do what I do and I do what I do. But I can't express how much I appreciate you and the work that you do. And no matter how many, brick walls you run into, or, 5 steps you might take forward and 10 steps back, I hope you still, you stay focused and intentional, because we need you. We so do need
Oh,
you.
thank you. Thank you. Well, it's people like you that keep me motivated and fighting that good fight and getting up every day and,
Absolutely,
and
absolutely.
having that glass half full.
Yes, for sure. So before we wrap, we've got about 5 minutes left. So Cheryl, what would you offer? I'm seeing some messages come in here from LinkedIn. This is excellent. Absolutely appreciate the conversation. So what would you share with the audience if there's 3 to 5 things you want to leave them with? I mean, you gave an excellent resource that's out there for them to go and start their assessment, which could let them know where their opportunities are. Is there anything else you want to share with the audience before we wrap?
Well, there are so many good resources out there. There is no shortage of resources. It's using the resources and the
Mm,
people with the power and the influence who can pull those levers and turn those knobs, right? We need to get to those people of influence because they've got the ability to make that systemic change.
yes.
So I would recommend finding out who that is in your organization and having a conversation. And if not already talking about it, open up the conversation, agree to or volunteer to give that feedback of what are the
Mhm.
obstacles, barriers, what's not working for you. as an
Yes.
individual. Another great tool that I just found is called the parity model.
Ah, okay.
So just Google parity model, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a wealth of information, but it also has a best practice check sheet. And so it
Oh,
will allow you to go in and assess, how are we doing in representation? And what are some things that, we can do to increase our representation? So it talks about having some targets out there. Now, you and I talked about those numbers. I
yeah.
believe you can't just look at the numbers. I think
Alone. Right.
the output, I think you have to look at all of the inputs, right? What is going
Yes.
to lead to
Yes.
you getting those numbers?
Right.
But it also looks at equality. What are some things that you can put
Oh.
in place to ensure equality? So that
Mm-hmm.
would be things like, we've been discussing, but also compensation,
Yes.
bonuses, pay,
Yes.
making sure that's done at some frequency,
Mm-hmm.
making sure that people are educated on bias, yeah, so that they know where to look for it. Having
Mm-hmm.
having some of your executives participate in listening tours. Putting, let's just say, a person who's in the
Oh,
majority with
yes.
a group of underrepresented people, having a facilitator come in and ask some questions to kind of draw out what is the experience that these
Yes.
people are having, because that, I'm telling you, there's nothing that opens eyes more than that, right? Just
Yes.
hearing
That is
real life
excellent.
situations and scenarios.
No, and Cheryl, I know a lot of that was happening in corporate America in 2020, after that event at the end of May, and it stopped. I
Hmm.
mean,
Hmm.
it should be something that happens on a fairly regular um, time frame, right? I mean, it's almost like town halls and different, but
Yeah.
having those listening discussions where you're truly actively listening, right? And you then take back some of that and implement it back to your systemic changes, right? So to your point of giving the opportunity for the underrepresented to be at the table when those
Yes.
discussions are taking place on what is needed and why it's needed. Oh, I love that idea. Great suggestion, Cheryl. These are awesome.
Yes.
These are
Yes.
absolutely
Yes.
awesome. Is there
Yeah.
anything else you wanted? Anything I didn't want to cut you off there? Was there anything else you wanted to share?
Well, I also think thinking more about inclusion, and how to
Mm,
be inclusive leader. And
yes,
let's face it, I mean, our demographics are changing. And so what is it? What is in it for the white male who's in the majority?
yes,
It's ensuring that everyone can be successful,
yes,
so
absolutely.
leading inclusively, and there's a lot of good tools. Deloitte has their 6C model, so it's
Yes,
courage, commitment,
yep,
cognizance, culturally competent, and there's a couple more that are escaping me right now. There's the backpack of an authentic leader, but just thinking about, how do I be more inclusive? Linda, I
yes.
make mistakes every day. It's not you're a bad person if you're
Oh,
overlooking some of these things. It's just we're learning. We're all learning all the time
exactly.
how to be
We're
better.
exactly. We're learning all the time. And it's not a we versus they. It's a
Right.
we.
Hmm.
We all can be successful together. You're absolutely right, Cheryl. I love that. The resources you've mentioned are phenomenal. We're going to make sure we capture those. And I usually take content and put it into a blog with associating you and your company with that. So we're going to make sure we capture all these resources because they've just been wonderful today. Well, Cheryl, thank you so much. I can't again tell you how much I appreciate you. And everybody, look, she and I have already talked. There's going to be a part three. Oops, where's my camera? There's going to be a part three, and we're actually going to shift the conversation because she and I we met for lunch and we were saying, we need to really reach out to women again, talk to them and say, don't leave corporate America.
That's right. We
So
need you to
remember,
stay.
we need you to stay in corporate America, right? So these systemic changes will take place. So there's going to be a part three with Cheryl
Yeah.
Thompson. But until then, Cheryl, again, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Anyone,
Linda.
oh, it's been my honor. Anyone, I'm telling you, anything around what we've talked about tonight, or you need help in your organization, this is the woman to reach out to. Cheryl Thompson, CADIA. That is CADIA.
Thank you.
Take care.
You as well, Linda. Thank you so much.